I thought it might be interesting to explain to you why that title is on the series. And in the series today, we will have a participant by the name of Gary Johnson. And early this summer, when I was talking to Gary about progress in his school community, I simply said the usual phrase, "How are you today? How are things going?" And he just opened up beautifully and he said, "Well, I'm just living in the joy of gratitude." And I thought, what a beautiful title for this series, because Gary has spent about the last 20 years working in a community that has been dedicated to bringing the principles into not only schools, but community agencies in Wisconsin. And so that's where the title came from. And I just want us to revel for a moment in that wonderful feeling of living in the joy of gratitude. You know, Sid always said that the greatest feeling, the highest feeling, was gratitude. And that's where we end up when we begin to work with the principles. And as we meet together today, I hope that we can remember that this feeling is really the power behind what we're aiming to do in schools, in communities. And as we start today, there are some things I want to just mention that are rather important. First of all, there are approximately 70 individuals registered for this series. And we knew from the outset that we were focusing on school employees because we are, in a sense, narrowing the task that we're trying to accomplish. And that is to bring the principles into schools, but to do it with the leadership of people who are already employed in school systems. So it's an inside-out look at how can we integrate the principles in schools. And in addition to that, we know that there are many other avenues by which schools can be impacted. And so on this series for the year, there are a number of individuals that we welcome very, very strongly who are not necessarily directly associated with the school system as an employee, but they too are dedicated to integrating the principles into the lives of staff and students who are part of school systems. So welcome to everyone. The other thing that I wanted to mention, it's sort of like, you know, when the stars line up, lots of things happen at one time. And this morning, I got an email from Rudy and Jenny Kennard with 3principlesmovies.com. And in the midst of their very hectic schedules, they have arranged to wonderfully create and open today on their site an education comprehensive resource page. We've all worked together with them for the last few months to identify books and articles and videos, so that will be available to you. And so it's just a coincidence that we're able to both do this first and announce that page that's open to the public. So I encourage you. Another thing that is kind of new for Supermind is that there has always been a forum tab on the webinars. And we encourage you, after this webinar is over and throughout the course of the year, to use that forum tab first to gather more information, which I've already posted there, and also to engage in a discussion with others on the webinar, and to have an opportunity to relate directly to speakers. So it's a first technologically, it's a first in terms of education, and I'm just delighted that everyone is here. I want to remind you, and I was a little bit struck as I began to look through the list of participants and speakers, I was struck at how many individuals had actually entered the world of the principles either with Sid Banks or with Roger Mills. Those were the two most common places that training was accessed over the years. And one of the things that I remember Roger talked about in the very, very first training or event that I was a part of, he said, if you don't have rapport with those that you are speaking to, don't go forward. And so today, I want us to remember that the connection, even virtually, is more important. The feeling is more important among us than the actual content of what will be said. So I welcome you to this year-long series. I welcome those who are not visible on the screen today, and I stress that the recordings are a permanent resource of a first-time gathering of educators and friends who are aiming to integrate the principles into the lives of schools in all forms. And I'm delighted today that we can start this series with a friend from a distance, a colleague, and an original student of Sid Banks. I welcome Barb Aust, and I believe the best way we learn about someone is to hear them tell their own stories. You know that she has recently published the lovely book called The Essential Curriculum, and I think the best thing is to just invite Barb to step to the front and begin to speak with all of us. Welcome, Barb.
Thanks, Kathy. Well, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be in the world. And it's really through the magic of this technology that we're able to join together in being one together and spreading this message. Thanks to Brett for hosting this year-long series, and to you, Kathy, for having the brilliant idea to put it together. And I have to say, in looking at you, being in service in this way has taken 10 years off of your life. You look wonderful. Most of all, I want to express gratitude to Sid Banks for his courage in sharing this with the world, because in those early days, when there was nobody else that was listening, he had the courage to begin talking to others, even though they thought he was out of his mind at times, but he just kept sharing, and his transformation was what brought other people along. And I think that's the key message for all of us today in terms of what makes a difference in school, and it's our own transformation. And with that happening, it makes a huge difference. And so I'll share my story of transformation. I have to say, I'm a little bit nervous about this. I talk all the time, but this is different. This seems so incredibly special today, and I'm already in tears.
You know, Barb, we're not used to virtual living rooms.
No, it's true. It's so true. The very first contact that I ever had with the three principles, and it didn't have a name at that time, was somebody gave me a Christmas gift in 1976, and it was this little book called Island of Knowledge. Mine's all tattered up, and there's a picture of Sid in those very early days on the back of it. And I looked at it and I thought, well, that's kind of interesting, and I just put it aside. And a couple of months later, there was a tragedy happen for a friend, and I was outside stomping around in my yard and crying and just couldn't believe that there could be this car accident. And my next door neighbor saw me and said, "What on earth is the matter? Come over, I'll make you a cup of tea." So we sat outside and had this conversation about life. And she said, "I've done everything, even to read some book about some guy on Salt Spring Island that thinks he's found the answer to everything." I said, "Well, I've got that book too." And we didn't live on Salt Spring Island. We were in a completely different city. And there were only a few copies made of that book. So I ran in the house and got it, and she ran in her house and came out, and we looked. Sure enough, serendipity, we both had the same little book. And she said, well, you know that there are people that meet and talk about his teachings, and sometimes he comes to the city and talks about them as well. So I thought, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. I'll go and listen to him. Well, the first meeting that I went to, he wasn't there. It was a group of people who had been listening to his teachings. And when I walked in the door, the person that came to welcome me and greet me had eyes that shone like candles. And I knew I'd found home, because whatever she had that she presented, that feeling of welcome, the feeling of that she was expressing of gratitude. She didn't say anything. She just put her arms out and said, welcome, come in. And I knew I'd found home. And as I listened to them that night, I didn't have a clue of what they were talking about, but I knew it felt incredible. My life was a mess, just a terrible mess. I'd gone through a couple of serious surgeries that year. I had a child with health conditions and huge learning issues, money problems. I was on prescription meds to bring me up, and then I would drink beer to take me down, take a sleeping pill to go to sleep. I was a mess. And then I tried to work with kids as well. Well, going in that state of mind and working with kids was not a particularly good thing to do, but I knew nothing else. But something magical happened in that time, and I could feel myself changing. And there was an opportunity 3 or 4 months later to go to a retreat in Washington State, where a number of the people who had been listening to Sid were going to go, and Sid would be there and he would be speaking. And my neighbor said, I'll look after your kids, I'll look after your daughter, I'll make sure she gets her appropriate medications. Your husband can look after them at night, but I'll make sure she's safe in the daytime. So I decided to go. And in the time there, listening to what was being said by people, but mostly just having this wonderful time, this feeling of camaraderie, of laughing, of just being filled with joy, made a huge difference. And then one night, after we'd heard Sid speak, we were singing together, just enjoying ourselves. And I heard from way deep inside myself the word safe. And I knew that forevermore, I would never have to worry about this child that I'd worried about day in, day out, every waking moment, had dreams about, concerns nonstop. And it was eliminated. She's now 46 years old. She was 6 at the time. And I don't worry about her, ever. I am so grateful for that, because I know she's safe. And everything changed because my thinking changed. I had no idea that's what was happening at the time, but there was this amazing transformation in how I viewed the world from that second of knowing from deep inside that all was well and that she was safe and that I never had to worry about her again. And when I came back from Washington State, I saw her differently. It's not necessarily that she was different, she just was who she was. And my level of acceptance and love and respect for her uniqueness was what was different. Her teacher had said that we would have to have another year in first grade, that she couldn't understand math, she didn't learn how to read. This was going to be problematic forever, and she took lots of medication. Within a month, her teacher came to me and said, it's as though a light has gone on inside that child. She learned to read like that. She can do her math. There's no problem. Everything is fine. The next year, she went on to win the academic award for the school and got a plaque. And it was like this miraculous thing happened. but we never talked about it. It just was the change in state of mind. And what happened for me was that I had changed, and everything about around in my world had changed as well. And the transformation was so profound that I got a call from my uncle, who was a medical doctor, and he asked me to come to his home. And he said, I have never seen such an immediate and profound change in a person. What has happened to you? And I couldn't really tell him, except that the evidence was I was laughing out loud. My husband looked like the best thing since sliced bread. My kids weren't driving me crazy anymore. My job was fun. My daughter was great. Everything was going well. And when I went to work, I loved being with the kids. It wasn't, oh, I got to go to work today. It was, wow, I get to go to work today. And I was working with preschoolers at that time. And it was joyful and fun and completely different. And it was just that moment of transformation from that change in thinking, not something I thought up. I didn't have to go, okay, I'm thinking this way about my daughter, I'm going to change that thought. It was just this momentary change in my state of mind that changed everything out there. And it was like when you throw a rock into the water, how the ripples go out. And what I noticed was that the ripples went out and everything about around me and in my life changed. And it wasn't transitory. Here we are 40 years later, and it's still changing. And it's almost as though it's brand new every day. Krista, I know you're on the line, and I hope you don't mind if I share a story. I didn't check this with you first, but it comes to mind right now. Krista Campsell and I have been doing a series of videos for teachers, and we did a filming on Monday. And when we finished, we'd done it in the way that we would have done it last week. But at the end of it, it wasn't right. It wasn't who we were today. And we redid the whole thing because in the moment, here we are 40 years later, we were brand new all over again. And the image that came to me was like floating down a river when you're on a raft or in a boat, and you never see the same scenery as you go down the river. It changes all the time. And that's, I think, what I've seen in terms of transformation from learning the three principles is that my life is transforming all the time. And it brings newness. Here I am about to hit 70, and it's brand new all over again. It's just pretty incredible. So I guess what I've seen, well, I know what I've seen, is there's no separation between me and outside. And that everything comes from inside me out. And when I get caught up and forget and think it's the circumstances outside that are making my life what it is, if I can settle back and calm down, I can see that that isn't really where it comes from. It comes from me, and it comes from a feeling that is so deep that it transforms me. And then transforms my world.
As you tell that story of your daughter, it's absolutely miraculous. Are you hearing me?
Yeah.
And yet it's ordinary. Can you talk about the paradox of that? Because sometimes people can be frightened by changes that are this big. You're literally talking about a very young child in today's special education terms who would have been at the high end of the spectrum. And the intervention that made that different was a change in you. And that's so far from where most of special education has been for the last many decades. Can you talk about that?
Yeah.
Were you accepted?
Well, yes and no. By some we were and some we weren't. And we didn't stay in the city. That was about the point where we moved to Salt Spring Island. And so that was a difference. But there were definitely, well, if I can give an example, when kids go to school, the public health here writes down any medications they're on, any conditions they have, and that's kept as a record in their file. And there were certainly people that wanted to keep her in that box. And I said to Sid, what do I do about her medication? I see that she's changed. Everything's different. But what do I do? And he said, you'll know. You'll know. It's all part of the same thing. It's all part of the big mind. You'll know what to do when the time is right. So we just continued on. And about 8 months into it, she said, she's just about to turn 7. She comes to me and says, Mommy, I'm not sick anymore and I'm never taking this medication again. The medicine, not medication. She used the word medicine. And she didn't. And we went to the pediatrician and she was checked out. And sure enough, he said, nope, she doesn't need it anymore. It's okay. And at school, there were certainly people that saw the change. Her first grade teacher certainly did. There were others that didn't. When we moved here, I have to admit, I was very subversive and I made sure that that wasn't in her file. Subversive.
You know,
but it was important.
My good friend Bonnie Bernard always used to talk about resilience research, and she would say the greatest risk for a child was the label we put on them.
Yes.
And if we sometimes can remember that the label is a phrase that gets used so professionals can talk with each other, it doesn't mean that's the whole of the person.
Right.
And you did an amazing thing, it seems to me, that you had the common sense to check with the pediatrician to make sure that there was agreement that would work. So we're in no way saying, toss the medicines for all.
Oh, heavens, no.
Yeah. Yes.
Absolutely not. And we had the support. That physician was amazing. Later, 5 or 6 years later, my daughter broke her arm and had to be taken to the city to have surgery on it. And that pediatrician walked by and saw us, and he came in and he remembered the story and he remembered the events. And he hopped up on her bed and he sat with her from 9 o'clock at night till 3 in the morning when she finally got into surgery, and just accompanied her and asked us question after question about what had happened in our lives and how she had done. And his curiosity was piqued by what had happened and what he was observing. But it was very real to us, and it was real, is real. And I think that you're quite right. What happens with us in school, because we need to get funding for kids, is we label them. And what I learned from watching my daughter and what happened in our lives was to take that label off, because if the label's there, it does give us money. But if we see through that set of lenses, we're putting limitations on instead of looking at possibility. And to use your phrase, we're seeing the kids at risk rather than at promise. Right. And we won't see them at promise.
Later in the series, we've intentionally scheduled some mental health professionals who work inside of school systems, and some of them actually do the diagnoses for children in their care, mm-hmm. or students, and we'll ask them to talk about how do you walk that dual line of getting the appropriate diagnosis so funding can flow, and also keep the health and potential of the child front and center. And some of these people are doing just amazing things. So this is a great introduction to that part of the series today. Once you had that experience with your daughter, what else began to unfold in perhaps your teaching or your writing?
It was mostly in my work at that time that it began to make a difference. And what I'd like to share here is that what we found is that we didn't have to take it into schools, that there wasn't anything to take in, because that was more application. What there was just going in your state of being different, that began to transform things. And I know that sounds goofy, but it's true. And that it's like you said in the beginning, that the feeling is so incredibly important. And I had this little aha moment when we were starting the barbecue the other night. And if you imagine yourself standing in front of the barbecue, if you don't ignite it, it's got the gas, it can't go. So here's what my little sparker, you need the spark. And as soon as you got that spark from your barbecue starter, the whole thing can go. And that's what needs to come through us, is our spark. And if we take responsibility for that and know that it starts there, then when we go in, we know what to do. And that's really the basis of it all. And Krista and I were chatting the other day. It's like there's nothing else to say, because it's just to take your spark with you, to take your deep feeling with you, and go in and see that the health of the helper, the most critical part of the mix of it all, is the teacher, the person who's working with the kids, the teacher or the teacher assistant or whoever it is that has that direct contact with the kids.
For sure, the teacher is really critical. I'm wondering, have you ever actually directly taught the principles to children?
When I first started with this, it was in the 70s. Sid hadn't articulated it as the three principles. He talked about thought, he talked about mind, he talked about consciousness. He had some other words that he used in there, but he didn't call it the three principles. And it wasn't as, I guess, defined is the only word I can think of at the moment. But it was about mind, thought, and consciousness. And I worked with younger kids. And so I didn't go in and teach, this is mind, thought, and consciousness, and here's how it all works, and this is the way it goes. I didn't do any of that. What I did was use the words that fit with the group that I was working with. And so as an example, if there'd been an altercation on the playground and two little kids would come into my office, because I was a teacher and a principal. I always made sure that I taught half the time and was administrator half the time, because I thought it was really important to remember what it felt like to be in the classroom. But in my office, when they would come in at noon, afternoon, after there'd been something happened on the playground, what I would do is something like, say, put your hand on your heart. What's happening? And they would tell me, oh, it's going really, 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 really fast. And so I would say, well, what are you thinking about right now? Oh, I'm really mad at somebody. So I would suggest that let's wait until you calm down, and then we'll talk about it. And then they'd put their hand on their heart, and when it had slowed down, they knew that their thinking had slowed down, and then they were able to resolve whatever it was. So it was more by example and in the moment and in the words that felt right at the time. And I found a quote of Sid's, and it says, "You pick whichever words you want, and if you're listening to me and you say, well, maybe Sid should say this word, you say it to yourself, because that's your guide, whatever you think. Nobody can tell you how to think or how to behave." And that certainly was how I went about working with kids, was using mind, thought, and consciousness, but in the words that worked in the setting that I was in.
In one sense, it takes a lot of pressure off of educators who are trying to figure out how to bring the principles to children, because you're really talking about learning the principles in your own personal life, living that, and then in the part of your life that is your school life, you're living those principles with the children and using whatever words come to you.
Yeah.
Sometime a few years ago, I remember Darlene Stewart saying to me, "I think people are making this too complex." When I was asking her, how do we really bring this into the school setting? And I think, the first step that you're outlining is the example of it playing out in your own life and living that 24/7 at school and at home. And then someday, some places, there are questions about creating a district, for example, commitment to integrating the principles. And maybe at first, that's giving staff an opportunity to learn the principles for themselves. And at another point, there is an opportunity to think about, and how can we together create some curriculum, some lessons? And that will be part of this series over time.
Yeah.
I'm wondering at this point if you would like to entertain some questions, or if you might want to proceed to talk about your book. Where did that come from?
Well, let's see if there are some questions first.
Okay. What we're going to do is ask those of you who are listening in, if you want to raise your hand. It's not going like this. It's going down to the bottom of the menu bar and simply clicking on the raise hand button. You go on participants, and if you want to ask us a question, you do that. And I'm going to unmute Brett for a second, because I'm not getting any questions at the moment. Okay. Brett, would you explain to the participants how they can technically raise their hand so we can know if they have a question or comment?
Yes. Okay. On the main Doom window, if you hover your mouse around a bit, a menu bar will appear at the bottom. It's called Participants. If you click on that, then a window will pop up showing a list of participants who are with us today. At the bottom left of that window is a button called Raise Hand. If you click on that, and then we can see a little sign on the screen saying you've got something to contribute. So at the moment, one person has already raised his hand.
Okay. I'm going to mute Brett and unmute John. You have a question.
Well, just a comment, actually. Can you hear me?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, great. Well, what Barbara was talking about, I was very moved by her description of how the change in her brought about the change in her daughter, and also the change in her brought about a change in just how people show up in their school systems. And I never had a principal's view of it until very recently, but I used to use quite a lot the expression, the hidden curriculum. I know that she's written something called the Essential Curriculum, and I use the term the hidden curriculum. The hidden curriculum being obviously not math and English and social studies, but what the students are learning by what they see and hear and experience of the adults around them in the system. And the lessons that they learn that those adults may not be aware that they're teaching indirectly. And I've always been very concerned about that. You know, in the same way that I would say that there's a sort of there's a hidden parenting that can go on, you know, in the home, the lessons that they learn by virtue of the example of the behaviors that they see in the home. And of course, in education, we're continually concerned about, you know, are they getting conflicting messages in those two environments and that sort of thing. So I just thought I'd throw that in, that I think that, you know, the hidden curriculum could be profoundly enhanced by people who bring a principle-based experience of their own lives to the school environment. So I just thought I'd throw that in.
Barb, I'll ask you to go.
Yeah, thank you very much for adding that, because it's so true. It's like that poem that's around children learn what they live. And it's really true. It's what we demonstrate for them all the time that they pick up on, and they feel it. It's not just what they see, it's what they feel in the atmosphere too. And in a school, you all you have to do is walk in the front door, and in 3 minutes, you know what that school is all about. Any institution, any home, you feel it. And it's that first sense of, okay, this is a place where my kid's going to be safe. That's going to make it a good place for the parents to leave their kids. They'll feel a lot more trust and be way more open to be supportive of the school if that happens.
Thank you. Is there another person that might have a question or comment? Just raise your hand. Okay, I think they're anxious for you to proceed, perhaps to chat about your book a bit.
Okay.
Oh, we have one question. I'll unmute Krista.
Hi.
Hi,
Barb.
Krista.
Hey, good morning. I'm curious, perhaps you intend on speaking about this a bit more later, but I love hearing about your work as a principal of a public elementary school. And I love, we haven't worked directly together, but what I hear from the people who have worked with you and from you yourself is how, you know, you're leading the ship, so to speak, but you're very much in a state of service at the same time. And I'd like you to speak a little bit about being in that principal role of public education.
Thanks, Krista. Well, it's true that the principal makes all the difference in the world. And in doing that, it's like the hidden curriculum that John spoke about. It's how you present yourself in being in collaboration with other people, in listening to what they have to say, in including them at the table. All of those things are really important, rather than being the power over, to share it, to be in service and find out what people need, and then help and support them to be able to achieve those goals. Because if we do that, we lessen the stress of the teachers. And when we lessen the stress of the teachers, they have a much better outcome with the kids that they're working with.
For sure. I'll invite others who might want to engage in discussion with her. We have at least two options. We can ask folks to introduce themselves and their area of experience, or we might ask Barb to talk about her book. How might you like to proceed, Barb?
Well, why don't I start in on the book, and then some things may come up from that.
Sure.
Okay. One of the things that to continue on from what Krista asked was coming to an understanding of what it means to be in service. And to be in service to me means that I need to listen deeply to what's inside. And I came across something that I have hanging on my wall that's made a difference, that reminds me. And it goes, make me a hollow reed from which the pith of self has been blown, so that I may become as a clear channel through which love may flow to others. And if I can imagine myself being that hollow reed, so that my deeper sense, where mind can speak through me, I do a better job. And that would be what I would do in the morning when I would go into my office. I would walk into the school, check the gardens on the way, and then go into my office and just start from that really clear place where I was beginning the day with joy and gratitude. And I knew if I brought that feeling to it, that the day, no matter what would come along, and there are always issues that would come up, that I would be in a better state of mind to be able to deal with what happened. And it's worked. It worked all those years and continues to work in any of the consulting work that I do now, to come from that as clear a state of mind as I can be, and so that I can be the hollow reed and let that inner intelligence guide me, the wisdom that is there. Because when I'm in that space, it's like a magnet and it draws it out of other people. And I think that's the key.
You know, it almost brings tears for me today because, and this is just a personal way of talking about that. Each person on the webinar probably has their own version and their own word choices. But for 25 years, as I went in to do any principles training in any location, before I would start that, I would literally leave the room and put myself in the hands of God. And we'll all use different words for that, but I think we're talking about being connected, as you say, letting that hollow reed be part of the experience that will flow from us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So you asked about the book. About maybe 8 or 9 years ago, I was called back out of retirement to fill in for someone who had gone on sick leave. And what was supposed to be a week turned into 8 months. It wasn't really what I had intended to be doing, but I was also glad to be in service. But I also thought maybe there's another way to be in service in addition to being in the school. And I had wanted to retire and so that I could write. So I decided that I would take every day, at the very end of the day, and I would keep a journal. And I would write down what the event was in the day that I would teach to a young administrator coming in, somebody brand new to the chair. And then I looked at what kind of a 3-principled message I might give them out of that. And that turned into a great big thick journal that I then thought, well, nobody's going to read all of that. They're too busy in a school. So I condensed it down to 21 short little lessons that a busy teacher or administrator could read. And they really are application. What it all is about is the feeling, absolutely the feeling. But in that feeling, there are things that I did that I think made a difference. And there were 3 big ideas in it. One, that's change is possible. And I think that's critically important to remember, that as we wander into a school, that there's potential in disguise everywhere. And that even the crabby old teacher that you think, oh, I wish they weren't here, they have something to offer if we look for what that kernel is inside them and are open to pulling it out and encouraging them and drawing it out. We had in one of the schools that I know, there was a very crabby person. And so that we had a code word, and it was pink circle. And when that person was crabby, we would just say pink circle time, and we would encircle that person with love for the day because we knew they were struggling, and it worked. It was beautiful, and the transformation in that person was incredible. So always remembering that change is possible, that really leads to a transformation in a school.
You know,
Sorry.
What strikes me about the pink circle notion, the belief that either a staff person or a child always has the potential for rising above, for realizing more than what we see, that for experiencing change that is in fact possible. Lots of times we get thinking about this being just, to impact children. But when you talk organizational dynamics, it's about the superintendent, about the school board, about parents. It's how we meet all of the players in that education world.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's like the Beatles. All we need is love. And it's true. It's really true. And if we remember that, change is possible, and that if we allow ourselves to be the hollow reed and to connect with that deeper place inside ourselves, whether we call it God, the creator, mind, spirit, there's a million words for it, and it doesn't matter what word you use, or what word we use, I'm sorry. It's just whatever connects us to that place, that spark inside that Amy talks about in her book. And when we let that come out, then it can connect with other people. I think of one particular child who wouldn't come into the building because he was so frightened, and he had horrible experiences in his life. And he said, my body tells me when it's safe. And he knew it wasn't safe to come inside the building. And so I opened my window to my office, and we did school through the window. And he would come every week, and we would talk through the window, and I would get him books from the library. He told me what he was interested in. I put books through the window for him. And then eventually he came into my office. He came that far. He wouldn't go in a classroom, but he would come into my office, and we would chat, and some learning would happen. And over the period of a year and a half, he eventually got to the point where he could come into a classroom. Now, it was my classroom, and he could do half a day with me because the trust had been built. But eventually he moved on and went to other classrooms and found a way to be in the world. And we could have judged him as being hopeless. Like, there's no way you can change a kid like that. He's not going to come into the building. There's no way. But over time, with patience and understanding, and allowing the wisdom from inside the teachers and inside the principal to come forward, his wisdom came, and we started to meet in the middle. Can't hear you.
Thank you. I see Karen Williams sitting there, smiling and nodding her head. And I'm wondering, may I unmute you, Karen?
Sure.
Would you let us know what you're thinking? Because you're quite with Barb, I can tell.
It's been so moving to hear this. It reminds me so much of being around Sid. It was all about the feeling. It always was. And as she's talking these stories, I relate to that with so many of the clients I've seen. You know, a mom who even has a son who's in his 40s, who's antisocial. And she came to me because of her problems, but she saw her son changing, and I did nothing. She just changed in her feeling and how she saw him. So the feeling is it's so incredible. That's what it's behind everything. You know, when we've been at the Three Principles School, one time Chip and Jan had their daughter speak, and she said, you know, I never learned anything about the principles growing up. I never heard anything. The Three Principles School was the first time she heard them speak about it. And I said, that's how it's been for all of us. We've shared it with our families and with who we're working with, without having to speak the three principles. Yeah. It's never been in the form. Yeah. Sid used to always say, listen for a feeling. And that was what it was all about. Yeah. This has been beautiful, Barb.
Thank you, Karen.
For the group,
Lovely to see you.
Could I ask that, Karen, would you mind just telling people in a simple phrase or two the nature of the work you have done for so many years?
I was an intensive care nurse when I learned this, and as soon as I saw this, I knew I had to take it out to teach people about their mental well-being. And so I worked in research for a while with veterans in a hospital. And so I'd see them every 3 months, every 6 months, and I saw them all changing. They would quit smoking, or they'd get along with their family members. And I mean, I wasn't teaching principles. As Barb says, back then there was no form. We were basically just sharing our love and what little bit we had, common sense about things. And then I was invited by Chris Heath from Minnesota to start a clinic in Hawaii. And we started the Hawaii Counseling and Education Center. My youngest client was 3 and my oldest is like 93. So in the mental health field, I've seen it everywhere. We worked with special ed and emotionally handicapped kids. We worked in the prisons with the youth and in the school systems with the kids. And one of the conferences we presented at in California years ago, our talk was basically seeing the health within. That's what we saw. We saw health in everybody that we worked with. I fell in love with every child I ever worked with, you know, and every schizophrenic was just as much fun to me as someone who was just a basic low down, you know, just feeling bad kind of person. And so it's just been, I love how you can take this anywhere. I always said I would never leave Hawaii except for a man, and I met a Canadian. And up in Canada now for the last 20 years. And I've managed group homes for the mentally ill, and I've worked with people with brain injuries, and I've worked in the mental health system. Just everywhere. It's like, as a nurse, I guess it's kind of like you see it, it goes across the board, no matter where I go. And it's not in teaching the principles. Sure, we get lost at times and think we put it into a form, but generally it's just the feeling is the most important thing you're sharing with someone. And then there's some common sense and wisdom that comes from you, as Barb said. Yeah. It's just whatever comes to you in that moment. When you're open, the right thing will come out.
There is so much going on in each individual participant's mind. I wanted you to just see, because I could tell the emotional strength of what was happening for Karen. So Barb, maybe you want to respond.
Oh, well, got me in tears too. And I think that what Karen said is so right. It really doesn't matter what words you use, because the right ones come in the right moment, as long as we don't let our head get in the way. And if we're that hollow reed again, and just allow the right ones to come through without thinking we have to find something to say. If we just trust, then it comes. Krista and I were discovering that the other day, weren't we, Krista? Where we thought we needed to say something in a certain way, and we discovered that when we did that, we lost the feeling. And when we lose the feeling, we're no longer connecting with someone else. And all we need to do is be there, and we connect, and the feeling comes. It's like sticking a plug into the socket. You get the electricity. And that's when it happens, and all the right things come. We don't have to have any conceptual frameworks, none of that. I found a quote of Elsie's where she said, "The feeling of connection is the most important element in teaching and mentoring. Feeling of essence is what opens the door to the soul. Understanding flows from that space." And right on, Elsie, that's so true. That's what teaching is all about. I work extensively with care homes now, as well as working with as a consultant in education. And it's exactly the same thing. Exactly. It's all about the feeling. You can have all these licensing rules and the whole ball of wax. It's like the No Child Left Behind Act, being on the same page every day. Forget it all. It's the feeling. It's the connection. It's the love. You have to do those other things. They're the form that you have to connect with, just like my daughter and her medication and going to the pediatrician. You do the common sense things. But the most important thing of all is that connection underneath. As John said, the hidden curriculum.
Yeah, the hidden curriculum is so true. On the other hand, we're caught almost in a catch-22 because we're talking about school systems that are publicly, maintained. There are school boards, there are elections, there are budgets, there are politicians, all of those things. And so in order to swim in that world, we also need to be able to be strong administrators, to be able to create a place ultimately inside of a school system where there is a commitment to integrating the principles. We'll deal with that later on in the series, but I'm just stressing it because there is this, I'll just call it the catch-22, that we have to walk in the real world of the existing systems in order to be able to move to the higher ground that you're talking about, and we all know is so critically important to the success that we will have with kids.
I'll give you a little example. In the British Columbia school system, it doesn't exist now, but in my years of being in schools and being a teacher and a principal, we had what was called accreditation. And a team would come in, and they would be experts chosen randomly from around the province. They would come swoop in for a week and do an external accreditation. The school would go through a year of using a format presented by the government. You'd go through and look at all of your systems, a self-assessment. And then the external team would come in, and they would look at what you had done. Then they would go through their own process. They would do community engagement and talk with people in the community to see whether they agreed, to parents, to kids, and then they would come up with a report. We had top people that came in. The report said, this school is filled with love and joy.
Wow.
And it meets all of the provincial requirements. I've saved that piece of paper because I think, yes, it's so important, because if that's not there, you have form, but there isn't the piece that fills it with joy and love. I think you have to dot the I's, you have to cross the T's. All of those things are critically important. That's how the system works. I couldn't live in my house if I didn't pay my mortgage. And if I couldn't use my visa if I didn't pay the bill every month. Those are just givens. But if I do it from a place where I'm in a joyful state, it's a whole lot different than, oh, I got to pay another bill. Just, it's us.
I love your word that we need to pay attention to our come from.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I see that we have a hand up, or we just did, and I will invite her to come back to us. Sue, are you there? Let me see if I can get her to put her hand up again. A minute.
Spain's far away.
It's far away, and I think she may have left us. We'll see. But please continue. If there's anyone that wants to raise your hand and pose a question, I have a couple of folks I might call on if needed. But Barb, you might want to continue a bit more about the book, or folks to raise your hands, whichever way.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the book, and if things come up, then people can raise questions. Around the change is possible idea. One of the things that I think is really important is that we invite people to the table. And as an administrator, I thought that was really important to flatten the hierarchy so that everybody was involved, because I see a school as being a whole conglomeration of people that have different functions within that wholeness. It's not that one person is more important than another. Every single person from that's on the staff, from the custodian to the principal, have equal contribution to make. I just thought about our janitor that we had at one time. The kids were being little monkeys in the boys' washroom, and they were decorating the walls with pee, as little boys love to do. And so instead of him coming and giving the kids what for, and he called them all together. He said, I'd like to come and have a school assembly. So he talked to the kids, and he wasn't specific about what they were doing, but they knew. And he talked to all of them, and he said, you know, when that happens, it makes my job really hard. And I have to spend my time cleaning in the washroom rather than doing some other things that would be a lot nicer for you. So I need you to help me. So there he was, the custodian of the school, taking on the role of the leader. And every night he would put a note on the blackboard in every class, don't have blackboards anymore, on whiteboards in the class, and say, you really did a good job, or oops, we need to pay attention again. And he took on a leadership role that was incredible. This was before Christmas. And the last day of school, before we let out for Christmas, he showed up in a taxi. And he got out of the cab, and he had a stack about 6 feet high of pizza boxes. And he came in and he said, I'm treating all the kids to pizza for helping me out. It was one of those moments of everybody doing a piece where they were a leader. The same thing I've seen happen with kids too. A little boy who would bring his allowance every week, and the school was sending school uniforms to Africa. And we had cut out dolls, you know, little paper dolls, and they were all up around the multi-purpose room. And as soon as we raised enough money to buy a uniform, the paper doll would have a uniform put on them. And it was all up around the room. So you could see the growing experience. And this little guy came every week and brought his allowance. And it would be in pennies and dimes and nickels, and he put it in the jar. And what he did in demonstrating his kindness and his leadership impacted the other kids. He was a leader in that moment. So it's the inviting people, everybody, to the table to let them share what's inside them, and letting that collective feeling grow. It's not just us. It's when we open up and make the opportunities available for other people to share as well.
And John has a comment to make.
I have to go teach a couple of classes. My kitten wants to be in the picture too right now, so I'm trying to prevent it. I have to go teach a couple of classes, but I just didn't want to go without saying goodbye. And I want to thank the facilitators so much for creating this, for making this happen, but also for everybody else who's been on the call, for whatever you may be doing to share this understanding with the world, and particularly in places of learning, wherever those might be. But thank you very much. I wish I could stay on the call, but I have to go do my thing. Thanks a lot.
Have a good day teaching.
Thank you much.
Barb, we're back to you.
Okay. One of the other parts that I think is really important is to go in and begin every day fresh and new, and make it a brand new start. And if we can make it a brand new start, then we live in a place of forgiveness, and grudges don't build up. We're just in a place where it can be alive every day and beautiful every day. And the other thing I think that was important to me was to recognize, and it's the same as Change is Possible, that there are no throwaway people. And there isn't anybody that can be dismissed or left off the table. We're all there together. We can pink circle everybody so that they feel this sense of love and caring all around them. And our job is to look for the innate strengths in each of those people and draw them out, because that's what education is drawing out. And if we can put ourselves in that position where we get to know people, then we can easily do that. And there are so many simple things that we can do, like just standing at the door every day and greeting the kids as they come in and finding out something about them. Same thing with the parents. I know a principal that goes out and he meets the school bus every day. And as the kids get off the bus, he knows all of their names. Recently, there was a conference on mental health for youth. And the psychologist that was speaking said that the research had shown that the most important thing for every kid was that sense of belonging, which many of us have felt for a long time. And I went to my medical doctor and she said, thank you. I want you to thank another principal for always standing at the door, knowing every kid's name and greeting them and letting them know that they belonged in that school, because from what the research says, it's the most important thing you can do. So that was kind of nice. Yesterday, I went to get a couple of keys cut, and the chap that was cutting the keys is a student I had, and he's probably in his early 40s. And he said, I just want you to know that you were really important in my life because you took us to your house and we made ice cream. I barely remember it. And he said, in school, I went on ski trips. I went to Europe. I've been all over the place. But he said, that's the one thing that stuck in my mind is when I was in grade 2, you walked us up the hill to your house and we sat outside and we made ice cream. And he said it was because you opened yourself to us and let us see you as a person. I thought, what a great thing to have heard yesterday before this call, because it's just an affirmation that we share who we are with kids and with the staff that we work with and with our parents. And if we do that, instead of having a suit of armor on, we're open and we're vulnerable and we get to share. Can't hear you.
Thank you. That's all I said. I'm wondering, I see some wonderful people in the group, and if you might want to offer something. There have been a lot of smiles, a lot of responses, visually. Marina, I wonder if you might be willing to let us know what you've been thinking about, noticing a little bit there. May I unmute you? Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. I was just, I've had a few questions throughout the call, but of course, as soon as I am going to ask them, they get answered already. So it's just like, yeah, you know what to do with that. Just listen to wisdom. But this part that you were talking about right now, about making it personal, I had a very curious experience just this Monday with a teacher at my kids' school. And my husband was the one talking about how when they make it personal and they open themselves up to the students, it can change the whole perspective. And he was talking about a particular experience where they had done some kind of award thing, and the prize was you got to get invited for lunch to the teacher's house. and that changed his whole perspective, not only on the teacher, but the school. And it went from, I don't want to go to school every morning, you know, to, wow, this really is a person, and there are other ways to connect with her. And it just changed completely. And we were talking about that with another group of teachers. And it was funny because you could exactly see which ones could relate to it and which ones were just like, what are you saying? That would be way too dangerous and way out of my comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
And how it is really not about getting out of your comfort zone, but just expanding your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Into, it becomes larger and larger and larger. Yeah, that's what I was thinking about right now. Now, I am not a teacher, but I teach the principles to teachers and principals. And it's always interesting to see how they get it in their personal lives first, and then they are able to bring it into the classroom. And it never works when you try to do it the other way around.
Yeah.
Now, this hidden curriculum, right? The hidden curriculum is not just at schools, it's everywhere. I mean, just like Karen was saying, it's in the nursing, it's in the parenting, it's in the way we conduct ourselves out there, on the street, you know, driving, in an elevator, the way we treat the waiter or the waitress.
Yeah.
It's just the undercurrent of everything you do. It's a culture. It's not necessarily a curriculum, it's a culture. And it just seeps through everything. So yes, state of mind and the meta consciousness of it. Thank you so much. I am so touched and so incredibly excited to be here. You have no idea. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Wow. Well, thank you. Because what you just said it's just beautiful about expanding ourselves. And we don't ever want to put ourselves as a teacher in a vulnerable place where it's like dotting the I's and crossing the T's. We have to listen to common sense and not put ourselves in a position of danger, of vulnerability that could cause us a problem. And when I took this little kid, the class to my house, that was in a different time. Would I do it today? I might not, unless I had 2 or 3 other adults with me, because I would want to be safe in this litigious world that we live in now. But there are so many other ways to be vulnerable. And it's opening up to who we are and sharing who we are. So were I to be teaching in a classroom today and have that same group of kids, what I might share is my artwork, that this is something that I love to do, or I might sit and play the piano for them, or I may share my poems that I write and show that piece of me that is deep and connected to my feelings and shares my joy. I might not share my home, but you know the thing that they loved that day is they asked, they were all outside, we were making ice cream on the back porch. They asked if they could see my jewelry. Oh. Because I had, for, primary teachers, you've got hearts for Valentine's and bunnies for Easter and all those kind of things that go with every holiday. And they wanted to see my jewelry box. And I brought it out. It was like I showed them the Queen's jewels. And I have several of the kids that went on that trip that talk about my jewelry box. Well, I could have taken that to school as my treasure box, and found a way to be vulnerable and to share myself in other ways too. If I was a fisherman, I might take my pictures of my big catch, or any other thing that shows who I am as a person.
Wow, lovely. I see so many wonderful participants, and I invite you to raise your hand with that mechanism, or I might just call on some of you. Is there anyone that might like to make a comment at this point? And it's Marina. I'll scroll down here. It takes me a second. Thank you. Perfect.
Thank you again. I just wanted to say that, just like you were saying, you know, you are this expansion. It's like the story you shared about the boy who wanted just to be safe inside your office and then in your classroom and then all that. But again, it just keeps pointing to the fact that wisdom will guide you in the moment. You know, how far you were willing to go, if you were willing to take them to your house or just bring your jewelry box, your jewelry box to school. And it's just always so reassuring to see how the answer always is wisdom will guide you and tell you what you need to do.
Yeah.
Like one of my first questions was when you were talking about how dangerous labels were. And I was thinking about, well, what about positive labels? You know, like you're brilliant or you're very intelligent, and how even those positive labels can bring harm too, because they might feel that they, you know.
And in the field of education, there's been, you know, waves of initiatives where teachers have been strongly encouraged to identify the strengths of students, or and to literally give labels to the children. I remember going into a particular school, and this little girl came up to me and she said, "You know what my gifts are? I can think, and I also can do math." And I thought, but what does she think about all of the other things? You know, it's another form of a box or an identity.
Yeah.
It's thank goodness it's moving in a positive direction, but there's much more to it than just doing strengths-based social work or positive psychology, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess what I wanted to say is just that wisdom will tell you what to do in the moment. It's not that you can't say anything, or you just have to say the positive, or you have to do half and half. It's just listening to wisdom in the moment. It's always ever that.
Thank you so much.
Beautiful.
I'm noticing we have about 10 minutes left, and sorry. We have about 10 minutes left, and in that time, I'm wondering if there's someone who has, you know, kind of a burning comment or question that you might like to raise. So I'll take a minute here for you to think about that. This is your opportunity. Gavin, if I can put you on the spot, may I unmute you? Gavin?
Hi. Hello.
Hello. I know you are interested.
You did put me on the spot, but it's just like I just wanted to say it's lovely to be here. I feel so it's so lovely to be connected with people across the world who are clearly got just oodles of experience in working in schools, and I suppose if there's anything if there's anything I'm grappling with, you know, I just came. So I'm not a teacher. I'm actually I work in corporate training. And I'm on the One Thought Professional Institute, so I'm doing a bit of one-to-one work, and I'm doing a bit of work in schools. But I'm the chair of governors of a very innovative new free school, which is like the equivalent of a charter school in the States. And we're a very small primary school, a beautiful school, full of love, full of joy, and yet I just came from a meeting with the head, and at the end, she looked at me and she was talking about some coaching she had done, and she just, the truth is, it's just tough. Her job's really, really tough. She's got so much on her plate. She runs the school almost on her own. She's got an amazing staff, and yet just it's full of it. She spends her whole life running the school for our children. And I remember somebody offered to give her an intensive retreat over the summer for free. And I raised it with her, and she just looked at me like I was crazy, that she was 3 days on herself, like just that she could even and I suppose, so the thing that really I'm grappling with actually in how I support our school is, how do I introduce to the teachers the idea that over and above all this other stuff we're asking them to do, all of the stuff we're asking as a governing body for them to do, safeguarding curriculum, looking after yourself and looking for your own state, peace of mind really is important. So that's the thing that just it keeps touching me, and going into schools, going into the classroom, observing lessons was what inspired me to think I have to do something for the school, because it's not easy to be a teacher. And that I just wanted to observe, just to say that really. But I'm so thank you so much, Rat, and for putting this group together, because I'm so excited just to be able to be with you for the next year, learning.
Thank you.
A number of years ago, and Krista will identify with this because she came in subsequent years, but I was asked if I would start a school just like that as the principal. And it was one of the most exhausting jobs I have ever had, and most challenging, because every single person that came to it, they wanted something different, but they called it an alternative school. But every parent, including, a couple, they all had a different idea of what that meant. And so I was as the principal working with the teacher and trying to grapple with all these different feelings and ideas that people had. And it wasn't until we went through hell for a while until we realized what we needed to do was come together with a good feeling, because it was happening with all this angst about what people wanted to have. And they were demanding, I want this. Well, alternate schools are this, they're that, they're the other thing. And it was when we began to come together and explore each other as people that it made a difference. And we started by having potlucks and having conversations together at a whole school meeting once a month. And then we went on a camping trip together and slept on the beach. And it was fabulous. So it came from the feeling. And I honestly can say that now it's 25 years later, that school is still operating. They're still operating as an alternative school and going down the road with some kind of joint idea about what they're looking for. They always have to refine it, but I just couldn't give any more advice than to say, come together in the feeling, and then it will be less stressful for the principal, the head teacher, and it will be more joyful as she takes care of herself, because that's all she can bring to the job is herself.
And Gavin, one of the things that I really heard you say is that you wanted to extend the invitation to the administrator to take the opportunity of receiving some training off-site. In this webinar today, there are educators from a particular school system who almost 20 years ago had an administrator, if I can be simple, who had lost her husband. And we went behind closed doors, she and I invited her to, at expense of the grant that we had at that time, to go and spend a week out in Washington. It happened to be with the Pranskys, for her own health and well-being. She took that opportunity to learn the principles and came back both personally and professionally renewed. And we're here 20 years later with folks in that system who are very dedicated to living the principles and bringing them to children. So things can start in exactly the way you're in a beautiful position as a board chair to be able to extend that. So thank you for making that comment. We are nearly at the end of our time. Barb will have the last word, but I want to mention a couple of things to you. This has been a grand kickoff. Remember that our learning community goes for a full year. We are today seeing about approximately a third of those who are actually registered. And we know in advance, we knew that many would be in their classrooms. So the recordings are available. The forum is available for you to communicate on. And you know, more than anything, I want you to know that Krista, who is with us, will be speaking on December 9th in this series. So put that on your calendar. And I just want to just extend my thanks and appreciation to Barb for surviving the storm last night, making it onto the webinar, and letting her nervousness fall aside. It was a beautiful experience. And Barb, this is your time for the last word.
Thank you. I'd like to suggest anybody that doesn't have it, this particular CD of Sid's called Attitude speaks to kids in schools and teachers, so that's a good one. And I would like to direct you to always look at the source materials that Sid has put out. He's got 6 books and many CDs and DVDs, and they are really the best place to find the goods for yourself. And so I'd like to finish with his very last words. They're fabulous. It lies within you, and if you can see that, well, it comes with a feeling. Look for a feeling. Never mind the talk, and if you can get that aloha feeling in you, that feeling of love, that feeling of understanding, and you give that aloha feeling away, you give the very essence of life by giving them love and understanding. And when you do that, they feel good. And when you walk away, you feel good. When you realize this, you can stand with pride and say, I know my profession well. I know how to help people. Thank you for being here today. I've loved this. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Brett. And thank you to all the participants. And I wish you the very best of luck, and I'll see you on the next call.